In this video, we're going to make a floating bar chart, which is sometimes also known as a waterfall chart. We're going to use the chart to introduce you to the terms of value of operations, enterprise value, and equity value for a company. We'll be using those later in our pro forma work. So if you'll hit pause and read the problem, you see that it's made up of 3 business units along with some forward-looking costs that altogether make the value of operations. When we add in the value of some non-operating assets, we get the enterprise value. And then when we subtract off the debt, we get the equity value, because you'll remember equity plus debt equals enterprise value. So the first calculation I want to make, let's just call it cumulative parts. Again, the purpose of this exercise is to do a sum of parts chart. And so by cumulative parts, we're just going to sum up all the parts. Hit F2, F4. We should be able to copy down. The next thing we want to do is find which parts are positive, because they're going to make our green bars. So the easiest way to do that is use a formula that says takes the maximum of 0 or the value. If the value is greater than 0, it'll use the value. If the value is less than 0, it'll use 0. We're going to do something similar for negative parts. So at this time we'll use the minimum of 0 or the value. So let me copy those. Notice that it pulled out the negative values and put them in the negative column, and the positive values in the positive column. Now, since we want those bars to have height, so to speak, I'm going to put a negative sign in front of minimum so that they'll have a positive value. But we know that they're negative bars because of which column they're in. Next thing we want to do is calculate these summary values, the bolded numbers above. And the way I want to do it for this chart is simply take, for each summary value, the cumulative parts. I think I took the cumulative parts down far enough. Okay, so let's make a graph with the green bars, the red bars, and the gray bars. We'll select the labels, hold down Control, or F8 I think is another way to do that. Once we get the labels and the data selected, including the headers, we'll say Insert, a stacked column chart. Now let's change these blue bars to be green, the gold ones to be red, and the gray ones to be a little bit darker gray. And now we're in good shape. We just need to get these bars to float. So let's talk for a minute about what these charts even do. If the first business unit is worth 200 and the second business is worth another 125, then together they're worth 325. Add in the third business unit at 175 and the sum is now up to 500. Take off the costs of 100 and we're at 400, which is our value of operations. If we add in some non-operating assets, perhaps it's vacant land or something like that, worth 50, now our value is up to 450. So this is not just operating assets, this is our entire enterprise value, operating and non-operating assets. Then if we want to take off the 200 in debt, now we're down to the 250 equity value. And notice each bar, the height of the bar is its actual value from the data. If it's positive, it's green. If it's negative, it's red. But we need these bars to float up in the air. So we're going to use a trick. We're going to put another series in underneath the bars, or to draw with a mouse. But we're just going to make that series invisible. So a couple of tricks to that. First, we need to calculate that series. I'm just going to call it float. And the way we're going to calculate float is the cumulative parts. So think of this as my black line up here, minus the positive parts. So if my black line is here at 325, I want to subtract off that 125 to get this invisible bar. And I also want to subtract off the summaries. And the reason we have to do that is we don't want any bars below the summaries. So if we subtract off the summary, that gets our invisible bars down to 0. Now we want to add the float to the chart as a new series of bars. So Control C to copy, grab the chart, Alt H, V, S. We've got the series names in the first row. We do want a new series, and the data is in columns. So we have bars, but they're not making anything float. They're on top instead of underneath the bars that we want to float. So one way we can fix that is select data, find the float, and move it up to the top of the list so that it will print first, which means it'll be at the bottom of the graph. Right click on it and fill it with nothing, no fill. And now our bars float. Now to finish cleaning up the chart, I'll fix the titles and delete the legend. One really nice thing about the way we've built this chart is that if these values change sign, then their bar will change color. For example, if business unit B all of a sudden becomes uneconomic and has a value of negative 100 instead of positive 125, then the chart adjusts and the color changes. It's not that the color of that bar changes, it's that the green bar went to 0 and the red bar went from 0 to negative 100. I see now that I forgot to add the labels, so let's go do that. First thing we need to do is find a way to get the labels to show up at the top of every chart, every bar. So we don't have a number right now. For example, we need both 500 on the third and the fourth row. We have a 500 on the third, but none of these data series, these columns, have a 500 on the fourth. So we need to calculate a series to tell us where to place those labels. Let's call that label position. And let's set it equal to the sum of all the bars that we could possibly have. We could have positive bars, negative bars, summaries, and float. And that should get us to the top of any one of these columns. So let's add that to the chart as a series. We don't want it as bars. In fact, we don't really want to see it at all, but we're going to click on it, change the chart type, and for that blue series, instead of a stacked column, let's temporarily make it align with markers. You notice that puts it in the right position for every column. Now I'm going to right click on it, add data labels. Right click on the data labels, format them, put them above. Now we've got them where we want them, we just don't have the right values in there. We need a column that shows the absolute value of each bar that's visible, and we don't have that right now. And let's call that our label. But if we summed up the absolute value of all 4 bars, of all 3 visible bars, only one of them is going to be non-zero at any time, so that's going to give us the right value. Now I just need these numbers on the graph instead of these numbers. So right now we're clicked on value, so it's getting the numbers by looking at the blue line and pulling those values from column H. Instead of value, we could show category name, we could show series name, but what I'd like to show is value from the cells. And the cells I'd like to use are these. Now our chart looks a lot like the desired chart. The only difference I can see at this point is we need to get rid of this line. We can't delete it because then the labels would go away. What we can do is tell it no line and no marker. And it's there but invisible, just like our floating bars are. So that's a trick we've used twice today. The other thing is to bold the 3 summary values. So we'll click the data series, click the cell one more time, the label, hit bold, italics. I'm using Control B, Control I. And let's make the font about 12 point. And then let's just use the format painter to fix the other 2. And now we've recreated the chart.